some nerd power. It's the Falcon Paladin Hour, a podcast by Falcon Paladin and Somicron. Falcon hates puns and thinks that they're all wrong. One's American and one is an Aussie, talking about StarCraft 2 and the esports scene.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Good to be here for yet another Falcon Paladin Hour with Somicron at twitch.tv/Somicron.
303rd.
Ooh,
Yeah.
nice palindrome.
I suppose it is. You know, actually, I saw something on, I think it was like a YouTube short or a TikTok someone sent me. And it was like this person being like, wow, my birthday, I can't believe it was on the 11th, 11/11, right? And I'm like, that's really interesting, but only because you're abbreviating the year. Your birthday is on the 11/11/2011. It's not special.
Wow, it took the wind right out of their sails, huh? Just, you're happy about this? Let me smash that right into the ground.
I didn't comment that and tell them, right? But I'm not an asshole. Let them be happy about it. That's fine. But it did it did make me wonder, like, did people in the 20th century care about that? Like, when did they start abbreviating the year? Like, you know, in dates and stuff. Like, was it in 1856 that they were writing the date as the 1st of February 76, or did they write 1656? You know?
Yeah.
How common was it to abbreviate the year?
Well,
historically?
The 49ers is a football team in California, and
Sure.
they're named after gold diggers of the rush of 1849.
Okay.
And I think the gold diggers called themselves the 49ers.
Okay.
So I think it dates back to at least the 1800s.
Okay.
That's what comes to mind when you ask that question.
Well, that's cool. That's something of an answer, I suppose.
No, and I don't know. I'm remembering books that I've read and history stuff and that I've studied, and yeah, I do think people were talking about, the summer of 56, or talking about 1756, or the revolution of, 42, and it's 1642. Like, I'm pretty sure they were doing that because, again, people's lifespans don't span more than a century the vast majority of the time. So they're just going to use the last two digits because what else are we talking about relative to our time frame right now,
Sure, but like, well, there's definitely not going to be anyone who was like born who like was old enough to know what the 20s were like in the 1920s who are going to now live through the 2020s.
Exactly.
But I'm young enough to that when I heard someone talk about, oh, it was like this in the 20s, that to me is always going to be a historical reference for at least, I don't know how long in my life, because I know I'm going to probably live through the 20s, the 2020s at least, and at some point I might refer to it as the 20s, but I don't know, it's still going to feel weird in my head that it's like, this is what we now call, like, this gets to be abbreviated, but nothing else does. Because contextually it makes sense. It makes, like, we get to call this the 20s because contextually abbreviating it makes sense to all of us. But, like, in 1,000 years' time, will people know that when Bryan Adams sung about the summer of 69, they'll know which century that was?
Yeah, I mean, it's context, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're talking about the giant blizzard of 20, and it's like, well, other records say a giant blizzard happened in 1920, but not 2020 or 1820, right?
Right.
It's just, it just makes it harder for, like, historians and stuff to work, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, how did we get there?
Palindromes in episode 303. Yeah.
Right, palindromes.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask, when did humanity start caring about their birthday being a palindrome and stuff like that? And I was like, well, honestly, for most of human history, it's like you wake up, you work your ass off, and then you go to sleep. And people didn't have a lot of time to, like, worry about stuff like that. So that's what I was going to say. But your question is more interesting, I think.
Well, yeah, maybe. But I think people have, I don't know. whenever we had enough people and enough infrastructure that people didn't have to work, there was some class of people that they didn't have to work.
That's true. There's always the ruling class.
Right. They made their birthdays interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And like they found ways to be like, yes, this is whatever day. We'll call it a public holiday because it's the day I was born or the day someone died, you know?
Yeah,
and
totally.
Those dates aren't equally any more special for those reasons. They're still just days, and history moves on, and you forget those people, and you forget those days, and they disappear. All turns to dust, and that's really depressing to think about. Let's move on. Let's move on right now.
I had a conversation in the Discord server about that, and I think we're made of stardust, and when we die, our matter will return to stardust at some point. So there you go. That's a happy thought. All right, so I did finish Horus Rising over the weekend.
You did?
I sure did.
Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, it was good. Took me about 3 hours on the read, I think is what my app said. So
fair enough. I did not reread it in the, I think, 5 days you gave me since when you said you were reading it.
6, because we did the podcast a day later last week.
Right, but you said, I'll have to check my book app, library book app, to see if I can get it. And then you told me when we were streaming StarCraft that you did get it, or you needed to start it the next day. So, it's 4 or 5 days. It's not a full 6. Not a full week. Cut me some slack. I did, however, go to the Lexicanum, which is basically the fan wiki for Warhammer, and reread the plot summaries. So
good. I'm glad you did that. That's going to be helpful. One thing I found interesting, there's an afterword by the author in whatever edition this ebook is that I read, and I think this is the 5th edition of the publishing. And he says there was a lot of trepidation around trying to tell this story because the book was published in 2006, I think.
It's about right.
And for the entire history of Warhammer before that, this Horus Heresy was not well defined. Just it's a ancient thing that happened. It's very, very important, but details are kind of scarce.
It's a foundational myth in 40K. Yeah.
Right. So the author was what that means is everybody who knows about it, it's an imagination thing for them. They imagine what happened, who was involved, how it went down, and they have their own perfect vision of why it was so important and so awesome. And then we come along and go, here's what happened. And everyone's like, shut up. That's not what happened. That doesn't go with my head canon. And I was like, oh, that's a really insightful thing to realize before you even started writing the book, that this was going to be a concern. But they were like, meh. But in the end, we were like, it's got to be done. We got to do this at some point. We got to codify this.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll start, I guess. Did you enjoy the book?
I did.
You did? Yeah.
It's good. It's just, I like it when IP is, especially books, are handled by people who know what they're doing. It's clear this author knows what they're doing. They are an excellent writer. Their vocabulary is big. They know how to use the right words. Dialogue is natural and flowing. It's just, I've read books before, especially in the IP reign, where it's this person does not know how to write at all. They might know everything about StarCraft, but holy smokes.
Right.
They do not know how to write a book. So this was appreciated.
Excellent.
So that was really good. That was nice.
How did you feel coming into it? Because as you said in the foreword, that everyone had already kind of known this story. That means that when they wrote it, or when at least this author wrote this book, that it was very clearly being written for people who knew a lot about the subject material already. And you've read a couple of Warhammer books, whatever, I've forced them on you, but only 5 or 6, right? And nothing from this time period, at least, right?
No, definitely not.
So did you struggle with that?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, what's interesting is that in the Roberto Gilliman.
Robute Gilliman. Rowboat Girly Man.
Robert Girly Man.
Rowboat.
Was that a trilogy? It was a trilogy.
It was a trilogy. Right? Yeah, the Dark Imperium. Yeah.
Right. And so he, pretty constantly thinks back to that time that Horus fell, right? The heresy was created.
Yeah.
And he doesn't give any details really about it either, obviously. And I was I was never I don't know. I never used my imagination to conjure up what I thought happened there. I was just like, all right, cool. This guy was really awesome and important, and then he chose evil. Neat. Let's move on.
So what's interesting about those is those were written well after these.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's also being written from a time when like 90% of the Horus Heresy books have been written and people do know what's there. And he just like the author, I think it's Guy Haley who wrote those, probably just didn't want to have Gulliman sit there and talk at everyone around him about what really happened. Because from 10,000 years later, those people don't really, like, the average person doesn't know. The people he's probably got around him, his space marines, his high advisors, his ecclesiastical priests or whatever, might know a little bit more just by their seniority, right?
Yeah.
But there are points in the book where he's telling them, I never said that didn't happen, and they just like refusing to believe him anyway because that's how it's been for 10,000 years. And so he's going to be light on details just because there's little point in explaining it to the people around him and not what that book's about to explain it to us. So
yeah, no, exactly. It's very much what would happen if Jesus arrived in our time and was like, I never said that from this well-known, well-beloved verse in the Bible.
Right.
Christians would be like, no, I think we know what you said. It's in the Bible.
I didn't turn water into wine. I turned it into vodka.
Right. And they're like, no,
I think it was wine.
You know
We've been using wine for a while, you know.
Yeah. That's totally what would happen. So that's a bit of genius in the authorship there, I think.
Yeah.
Anywho, yeah. So yeah, there were a couple things. Yeah, just a lot of stuff I want to talk about. One of the first things that I really noted was we're in the midst. Well, I think they refer to it as kind of like the cleaning up stage of their campaign to conquer the universe, right?
Yeah. So they're in the Great Crusade. And I'm looking at the plot summary here. It says it's the 203rd year of the Great Crusade. And most of the work is done. Like, there's still things kicking about. A couple of orcs that need killing over here or whatever. Human worlds are constantly still being found. But most of the work is done for the galaxy, right? They've got it.
Right. And so the demarcation here is that, the Emperor was personally leading the conquest and the conquering for the first couple hundred years.
Yeah.
And then eventually he's like, nah, I'm out.
I got other
Horus,
stuff to do.
my place. Yeah, Horus, you're my favorite son. Get out there. You be me out there and clean the rest of this stuff up. I'm going to go hang out and devour souls for a while. Peace.
Well, he doesn't do that yet. But yeah, not yet.
Eventually.
Eventually, but it is a kind of a big deal that the Emperor just kind of took off because he didn't tell Horus what he was going to do, right? Like, you're like, oh, I'm going to go eat souls. He didn't tell him that. He didn't tell him anything. He's like, I've got a secret project that I need to go work on in my lab back on Earth. You're the War Master. I have elevated you first amongst equals of all your brothers, all 18 of you.
Right.
There's not a lot left to do, but it's yours to do, okay? Also, I don't know how much this book touches on it, but the Council of Terror is this, like, civilian organization that is now put in charge of the War Council. Because the War Council previously was the Emperor, Horus, other Primarchs, and, like, the generals and stuff, and they were directly in charge of the Imperium before this. Now they're subservient to the civilian, it's not a democracy, but the civilian government, basically.
Yeah, they're touched on a little bit in the form of taxation law.
Yeah, there's...
The Emperor had set up these rules for taxation for every world that they conquered in order to help the conquest keep going.
Right.
And Horus is like, look, man, like, some of these places are barely holding on. Like, if we force them to hold to this taxation, we're going to create civil wars and revolts, and we don't want, that's worse than like people not really paying all of their taxes right now. And the civilian government's like, but the Emperor said, and Horus is like, but the reality we're faced with. Which I'm going to spoil something for you. It's like a little spoiler, but the Emperor is in a big rush, right? At this point, you don't know why, but this is it being touched on even here. That the Emperor, who is someone who is functionally immortal, right? At this point, he's over 50,000 years old, like, already.
and he is in a rush. Right? That is why some of this stuff is getting pushed through. It's like they're not meeting reconstruction deadlines, right, already, and now you want to tax them as well. They're barely rebuilding. And it's something that I really love thinking about when I go back, and now that I've got all this extra knowledge from having read some of the more recent books. They kind of touch on all of them closely. So good things to come if you're enjoying this is what I'm getting at. Like lots of... But
palace intrigue and
So one of the other things that the Council of Terror enforce on the legions of the Great Crusade is remembrances, which is where I think you get the maybe 4 or 5 non-Space Marine characters in the entire book who happen to be the regular human point of view characters for the story. Who I personally really like some of these characters.
Certainly, yeah. Yeah, they're basically journalists, right?
Basically.
War correspondent journalists,
Kind of. They're like journalist artists. There's like a photographer and a poet and a documentarianist. That's Mercedes Ollerton. She's got like a extended brain or whatever that lets her visually record her memories and like display them, but not just like cameras. Which
reminds me, there have been certain cultures in world history where they take infants and they bind their heads up to create an elongated skull, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I know what that looks like.
Yeah, it's basically like that. So that I really, really like their kind of arcs. They continue on through most of the books. Like, they're not in most of the books, but they survive through the timeline of most of the books. I've just finished reading The End of the Death Volume 2, and the third one's coming out soon, and that's supposed to be like the very last final for real to see this one, guys. And I want to say like Keela and Carol Cinderman are both still in it, so if you like those characters, expect more.
No, they're great. And yeah, like you said, it's nice to have a non-Space Marine point of view, because Space Marines have a very specific way they look at things. And
it's not very human. It's not very human. Yeah.
They're not very human. They're pretty distinctly a little bit far away from human on the human scale.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how kind of the book is split up into kind of 3 separate conquests.
Yes.
And like interactions and discoveries of new peoples and aliens and stuff. The first one, they find a group of effectively humans. And I like that. I like that they're kind of consistently running across different groups of people that originated from Earth, from Terra, right? But they've been so disconnected over the stars for so long that their languages are different and their customs are different. It varies. Sometimes the communication is not that hard. Sometimes it's more difficult, right?
Right. I do have to ask, how did you enjoy the bait and switch at the very, very, very beginning, where it's like, I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor, right?
Yeah.
And it fully sets it up that this is like the 5th planet from the sun. You know, it's Earth-like. They're calling it Terra. There is this person calling themselves the God Emperor of mankind, and they believe they're on Earth, and that this is where humanity spawned from. And you know, obviously it's not, but you know, how did you enjoy that bait and switch? Because I've heard people be like, that got me, you know, like, not got me in the first half. You just had me, and then what'd you think?
It definitely got me, and when you finally figure out what's going on, it's like, okay, you were trying to trick us. Fair enough, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
It's foreshadowing of the highest order as well.
Certainly true. It's not purely a trick. It is also literary device.
Yes,
on some level. Anyway.
So, what is the name of this planet? I'm like scanning over the plot summary to be like, where is this? It's the 63rd Expedition, 6319. Yeah.
6319, right.
Yeah.
And they name these planets after what expedition conquered it and what number of conquering it was.
Yes.
Yeah. which I don't know. I'm not as good with numbers as names, so naming it 6319, my brain's like, it's not really sticking.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things I like, there's a conversation early in the book where I forget his name, kind of the philosopher historian character.
The poet Ignat Carcassy?
I
Ignace.
think so.
Or Kirill Sinderman? Is he?
It might be Cinnamon. Yeah.
Is he old or young?
He's old.
Okay, Kirill Sinderman. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just the conversations going on where it's like the philosophy and the morality behind the crusade.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about the scene where he's like teaching a class about the imperial truth?
Yes.
And it's like, why do we fight? Is it like simply because we are right and you are wrong, and we must therefore we will, or is it because we can, or like where's the moral line of what we do? Is kind of what he's trying to teach here. His argument is kind of circular and doesn't actually give an answer for why they're right. Kirill's like, I don't know how much of this is like over-explaining the back text to someone who's never read the books, but Kirill Sinderman and Horus here worked directly with the Emperor for a while, and the Emperor's word is law. Like, what he says is truth, even though he's not worshipped as a demigod or a god at this point. You still couldn't really naysay him if he put his foot down, right? Like, there were times where he would like open the floor up to conversation and collaboration and all this stuff. Like, he was still a person ruling with a council, but the Emperor says there are no gods, there are nothing to worship, there is nothing that can comfort you in this life about what's in the next. This is my imperial truth. And Ignace Carcassy kind of has to just teach that. No, not Ignace. Kirill Sinderman kind of just has to teach that. And it's spoilers, it's not true. The imperial truth is a lie. And so he doesn't actually have an answer for these people. But it's still a great scene where he's trying. And that's like his job. And it's technically propaganda, but I like it. I like it a lot.
No, it's super propaganda. Absolutely. Because it starts out with this like high idea of, we're not doing this because we say we're right and you say you're wrong. That's how children argue. Right. But then he kind of circles back around to that idea. It's like, we have the truth. It's like, we have the truth. Enough. We know it's the truth. And therefore we have the responsibility to enlighten them, Yeah. Yep. And so that's a thing. There are a few different points of contradiction in what the Emperor says and what the belief systems are throughout the book. There's that one. There's the idea, somebody floats the idea of like, so they're talking about planet murder with the aliens that are just like bred to destroy everything. The mega arachnids. Yeah. I got a lot. Someone go. Well, just to the point real quick. Someone just says, why can't we just leave it alone? Right. Like, they can't leave the planet. They're no threat to anybody else. Let them have it. Right. But the doctrine is, if we can't reason with them, if we can't bring them into the Imperium, we kill them all. Right. Well, it's like, why? Like, why do we have to lose Space Marines and lose people for this? Why can't we just leave them alone? And that can just be applied to every other planet they ever conquered, right? Right. But at that point, you wouldn't have an Imperium, a galaxy-spanning empire. You just wouldn't have it. Right. And I mean, it's interesting because, like, when they come across 6319 and it's this human society, right? There is efforts to, like, integrate with them. But then they find out, no. Sorry, I'm thinking of the next book. I nearly spoiled that for you. But this one, they kill some, like, favorited Astartes in Horus's personal council, the Mournival, like, Hasta Sejanus. Yep. And so, okay, well, now they've killed a favorited son, so now it is war. Right. Like, they fired the first shot. We came in peace. We came to do diplomacy. We came to be like, what's up? We're brothers, and you murdered our emissary. Right. Yes. So there is definitely times where they're like, hey, we can integrate you peacefully, right? This will take time. We'll have a lot to talk about. Kirill Sinderman runs, like, the Iterator program, essentially, which are propagandists. But they will also, like, infiltrate the crowds to respond to Imperial
broadcasts and stuff favorably. They'll basically work with the crowd to like shift their thoughts into not rebellion, and it's very subtle maneuvering, but they will integrate people peacefully if they can. Something like the mega arachnids, they just never will, right?
Right.
They abhor the Xenos even now, but they could have straight up just left the planet, right?
Yeah.
They could have.
And again, it would have saved so many of their own men's lives.
Mm-hmm. And like
so
6
many
months
people
of
died
campaigning.
down there.
Yeah. It's like just like to belabor the point even. The Blood Angels, who are another legion, not Horus's Lunar Wolves, but they send like a force to the planet, all get killed, and on like this transmission of like, this planet is murder, we're getting killed. That's how they named the planet. They're like, someone described the planet as being murder, so like, oh, we'll just call that planet murder. And now it's planet murder. And they're like, we want that. And it's like, why do you want that?
Yeah, what is it? And they do some explaining of like, this is testing ourselves against the best the galaxy has to offer for war. Right? This is as tough as it gets down here. Mm-hmm. How do we test our own might and our own power unless we're pushed to our limits? Right?
Right. There's a little bit of that.
There's some of that I get. Yeah.
There's some of that, but that's also, okay, so all of the legions have their own different quirks. So some of them are very, very angry, like the world eaters. They basically deploy en masse in every fight and just charge, right? It's kind of what they do. Here we have the Third Legion, which is the Emperor's Children, who consider themselves to be perfectionists, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're given the point of view of Lucius, who's like an excellent duelist. He absolutely just wants to fight people with his sword all the livelong day. That's all he wants. And so for them to come here and be like, we need to test ourselves to prove that we're better than everyone else, that like the Blood Angels came here and they couldn't do it, but we're so prideful, we're so arrogant, we have to do this because nobody else could. It's us. Spoilers, they very nearly can't either because Eidolon, who is a huge dick, right, is basically putting his own pride on the line and refusing to step down or step back from it. So part of the Imperium is like that. Some of the other people might have like, well, we could just bomb it from orbit, Yeah,
I mean, if the goal is just to eliminate.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like these people don't have spaceships. They're not even people. They're spiders. But someone somewhere said we need to do a ground war, and now thousands of people died doing it, and like it's such a great play for the Imperium to be like, hey, you're going to commit to bad ideas because someone had a bad idea, and then they immediately move on to like the third book where they meet the Interrex, who had quarantined this planet and been like, look, the Megarachnids used to have spaceships, but we beat them. They were a huge threat. And so now we've got like a penal planet for them where they can just live peacefully by themselves. We put up all these warnings and you stupid idiots ignored it. But you could have just let them have the planet. Like the Interrex are technologically equivalent to the Imperium and have the ability to just be like, we don't need to exterminate you. We don't want to see you gone from the galaxy. But we're just going to limit what you can do. You just get this one planet. And it's vastly contrasts that with the Imperium. And suddenly you have, like in this first book of the Horus Heresy, a book that says the Emperor's way and the Imperial way is not the only way.
Right.
And that's really, really, really important to keep in mind for like 40K and the way things become, that it didn't have to be this way. It's possible to do it, to do something else,
Yep. There are different paths, certainly.
And like, just that the Emperor, despite being, immortal, timelessly wisdom and wise, is in a rush and is getting it wrong for the sake of speed. Like, he's building something that is going to crack, And that's what we've got. What did you think of the third book, or the third act, or part 3? Where
Can we go back to the first one?
the first one? Okay, back. Oh, right, because we skipped over Jubal.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
That was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of forgot that that's a thing that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they conquer like the top half of the planet, like a major population center. Like, okay, so we're gonna send some people down to clean up the rest of the planet. We're gonna move on. And then they get reports that like there's this big holdout in like along the equator or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So they're like, okay, we'll send the Luna Wolves. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a bigger decision than that. And they talked about it, but yeah,
Right.
that's basically how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So they go down there and like over the Vox, there's this voice that comes over it, right?
Samus.
Yeah, Samus. It's like
Samus is the name that you'll hear. I am Samus. Samus is all around you. Samus is the man beside you. Samus will gnaw upon your bones.
Right.
Samus might be one of my favorite demons because he pops up later and like again and again because you kind of can't kill demons most of the time. Like they kind of just get banished to the warp and come back. And Samus has always got this creepy like, I am Samus. I am the one behind you. You know my name. I am Samus. It's what he does every time, and it's always creepy and thrilling. I love it.
It's just his move. That's what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wants you to know his name.
Right. So what's fun about this is everyone's like, what is this voice? And this one guy's like, I was hearing the voice and I wasn't connected to the comms at all. So what the hell?
Right.
Right. And the doctrine here is there is no magic. There are no spirits.
Well,
There is nothing. They're pagan beliefs by stupid people. We're here to free them of that superstition.
right.
We are science, gosh dang it.
Yeah.
Right?
So it is interesting that while they say there are no gods and that all of like this ritual and superstition is wrong and we are here to bring them the enlightenment of science, they know magic exists.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yep.
the legions would have had a librarian department, which is Space Marine psychers. So they know psychics exist. They just believe that it's tapping into the warp and that like that's not magic. Even though it very clearly is just magic, right? From our perspective, it's you in theory can scientifically, I don't know, learn it. Essentially, is what they think.
They think, but no one's done it. I mean,
Right.
yeah, they have that conversation after what happens at the Jubal. It's like Logan's freaking out about it, and is it Horus? Somebody's talking to him, trying to talk him down.
Horus tells him that they're Xenos inside the warp, like any other, just more insidious.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
'cause-
he's like, look, man, it's the warp. Do you understand the warp? No, I don't either. So it's magic, right? Any sufficiently advanced technology that cannot be understood by the people who are looking at it is magic.
Right. Except what Horus is telling him here is that Loken had been laboring under the belief that while there are things in the warp, entities with, sentience basically, that are predators in the deep, right? Like these are sharks in an ocean, right? He was under the belief that they were only a risk to people who are like psychers, people who are, because they have, like, even in this time, they're not using science, like Vox waves to travel, like to communicate across the period. They're using astro telepaths, and I think it's called numerancy. No, not numerancy. I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically reading dreams. You send a series of like semi-standardized pictures and symbols and hope that the other person somewhere else in the galaxy knows what those mean and can decode your dreams in the same way that you built them to send messages. Like that's how email works here. So like the use of psychers is everywhere here, as much as psychers can be. They're fairly rare. Like 1 in a million people born as a psyker or whatever, something like that. But he was under the impression that like possession by a warp beast is only something that psychically enabled people have to fit.
Right.
And here
they've got a conduit to the warp into their own brains.
yes. And so what Horus is telling him here is like, no, anyone really kind of can be. And unfortunately, Dear Jubal here is possessed. And possessed is kind of the only word you can use. And that it's hard to not think of spirits and magic when you hear possessed. And that's what I think Loken's having trouble with here.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, from our perspective too, it's very much the Christian version of demonic possession. Right?
Yeah.
Someone else is in charge. The body changes. It becomes a lot stronger than it was previous to possession, which is another big hallmark of, like, again, The Exorcist and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah. So Jubal's down there exploring some caves in some holdout for this planet. And he somehow gets he gets infected by Samus, murders most of the people on his squad. The people that come to see what's going on, he kills most of them. Like, he's only barely subdued by Loken being a hero.
Right.
And then when they think he's dead, or they think he's subdued, rather, he's not dead. They think he doesn't kill him because he's his brother.
Right.
Right. They think he's subdued. He gets up and keeps going. And it's like, what? Okay, this is not all right. This is really bad stuff. Almost eats one of the remembrancers.
Yeah. Which is not good.
Nope.
Yeah, so I think Euphrates Killer was down there. Like, they snuck away from their army escort to go and be like, let's go and see what the Space Marines do in action. Like, let's get a first-hand look. Which I think in the next book, there's another Remembrancer that shows up who also does that and is just like, let me take my space yacht out to the battlefield, y'all. And that goes as well as you can think it would. It's great. I love it. But yeah, so Euphrates Killer has as much as a hard time processing what she sees as Loken does. And she doesn't have, the Emperor's son to explain it to her as like this fountain of knowledge and absolute truth to rely on. So, is there anything else in the first act you wanted to talk about? Because we basically can skip there to the third because she finds religion. Right. And that's how she deals with it,
She basically, she's doing terribly. She's got PTSD. She can't sleep. She's not performing her duties. She's like hanging out naked in her quarters, like dirty, and her hair's growing out. And it's this is not a healthy person.
She's drinking and finding comfort with other people where she can.
Right. And so Loken comes and he's like, "What's up?" I'm really sorry. I probably should have seen this coming.
Yeah.
Let me help you if I can.
Right.
And then when Loken leaves, she scurries over to this cupboard where she has a shrine to the Emperor and these candles she's lighting, and she's praying to him. It's insofar as the Emperor's like, "I'm not a god, don't worship me," people are like, "The universe is scary. There are scary dark things out there. We need protection."
Right. So the thing that she has is the Lectitio Divinitatis. That's what she's reading from. I think it's mentioned here. It's I've been a while and I'm just reading the plot summary on Wikipedia basically.
Yeah.
But the it's basically the Bible for Warhammer, right? It's the Emperor's a god, worship him, right? It should only be that long, but there's more because it makes all these claims about only the truly divine to deny their divinity, which is a stupid claim, I think. But it's we never actually get a full here's the book. It's just no, seriously, it's really compelling to everyone, almost everyone who reads it. And well, trust us. Interestingly enough, that book is being spread around the legions in secret from the mortal deck crews who run the ships, basically. I don't remember how much they touch on it here, but it actually originally came from one of the Emperor's other sons. Who is called I'm blanking on his name. Aurelian. That's kind of what he's known as. Lorgar Aurelian. He was one of the Primarchs who believed the Emperor was a god. And so he wrote this book and gifted it to his sons, his Space Marines, and to his brothers. And his brothers are all just oh, thanks for the gift. I guess I won't talk to Dad about this worship thing. I'll keep the secret for you. But the Space Marines gave it to the human followers, and it kind of spreads. And it's very much an in secret thing at the moment, but
Right.
it's one of those plot threads you should like pin to a wall because it's definitely going places.
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's impossible to miss because she waits until Loken's gone, and
Right.
then she's like, "Let's go." So obviously, she's hiding it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right. So yeah. So that's. Yep. So there's scary monsters in the warp.
Scary monsters in the warp, which you then also have the Interrex have this like Horus is trying to talk with the Interrex like he was with 6319, like, hey, come join us peacefully, even though you have Xenos in your culture, right? Like they have these Kinnerbrak things, and like they also talk with singing and music because it's easier for both species to communicate like that than in like mouths and whatever it is the Kinnerbrak use. And like a lot of he's getting a lot of pressure from like the legions that like, hey, this is taking too long. Like we're spending months here trying to work out how these people can like peacefully join the Imperium. And the reason why they're getting so hesitant is because they have this concept called chaos.
Right.
Which they cannot believe that the Imperium does not know about, at least publicly, right? Like,
Right.
here you are calling yourself a war master, offering, like, wanting us to join you, and like you don't know what chaos is. And again, this is the civilization that shows that the Imperial way doesn't have to be the only way, and they're smart enough about chaos without being like corrupted by it, and you know, capable enough of working around it that they've got a demon blade in a museum on display as like, here's a great weapon of the enemy, be careful. And here is like their society isn't falling apart. It's not secretly run by chaos worshippers. It's it's like an example of like, even if does get out to like most of the people or all the people even, it's not the end of the world, but the Emperor has deliberately not told people what things in the warp are, has denied people knowing what chaos is, you know? And so Loken is like really struggling with what Horus told him about Jubal being possessed, and it's like, oh. And I think, like, outside the context of just the story, it's really interesting based on, like, the Imperium doesn't have to be this way. But in the story, Loken is, like, really getting to a point where he is beginning to question, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yep.
And that's kind of what he does for the next couple of books, is continue to question. So when someone steals the anatheme, which is this demon blade, Horus is forced to basically make war on these people because they don't believe that he doesn't know anything. He didn't steal it, but somebody did, and again, the Imperium has to just exterminate these people, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of sad.
It is. It's really sad.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when the Imperium shows up to a planet with other humans, it's not just like join with us. It's like bend the knee, acknowledge the Emperor, and get rid of all your superstition, and like then you can join us. And it's like, that's pretty objectionable to most people, right?
It is. I will say that like there's a lot of like work that goes on in the background that's kind of talked about to meet these human civilizations halfway, where it's like, like the iterators, what they do is they go into a planet who they're in negotiation with, learn the customs, and kind of send reports back on like what's definitely superstition and what's just culture. And so there's a lot of stuff that still ends up sticking around. And the Imperium will do carrot and the stick, where it's like, hey, come join us. Here's all this like sweet technology. You get to be part of like humanity's empire again as we conquer the galaxy. And that can be really enticing to a lot of planets, especially a lot of them have been cut off and don't necessarily have void transportation. So the opportunities for trade is huge as well. Like even just like, oh, we need food, right? Or we need technology to fix our broken air purifiers or whatever. Like there's a lot of reasons why people will go, okay, this little superstition we have about daubing the next king with a mark of blood on his forehead, we can meet on the middle ground and cut that out for you guys. So there's a lot of work that's going both ways. I don't know that this book touches on a lot of that, but
not really. It just really seems like everything's cool wherever we show up, and we demand that they bend the knee to us and join us, and if not, we'll kill them.
Right.
Like, oh, cool. Nice.
That is definitely the stick option, which
is interesting because the Roman Empire expanded and was as successful as it was because it let people. You have a god, bring it on in.
Right.
Keep worshiping your god. We don't give a shit. And the Imperium's like, no, your old ways and gods are bad. Leave them. And people are like, but we like our gods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's again, integration is the exception, not the rule. But usually there will be a populace left over to rule because it's easier to keep some people there than it is to resettle others. Although part of the commission for the Imperial Army was that if you survive your 40-year contract or whatever, you get the rights to resettle to a conquered planet as an Imperial citizen. So there definitely were resettlements going on, but again, not really touched on here. But you can see why it's laying the groundwork that most of these people have been beyond decimated, right? Absolutely slaughtered 9/10 of their population, forced to rebuild in a rush to meet tithe or tax deadlines that aren't realistic, and why that might foster some heresy or some rebellions,
Yeah. A little civil war.
Just a touch of civil war.
Classic.
Yeah.
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 Oh, and then there's the whole plot line where Loken finds out about this secret fraternity of space marines.
Right, the lodge, the warrior lodge.
Yeah. And officially that kind of thing is bad news.
Right.
Because it tends to foster superstition and pagan rituals and all this stuff.
There's definitely an element of ritual to it. And when Loken is even suspicious of when he's inducted into the Monoval, they're doing this ritual in a river under the moonlight, and he's like, are you sure this isn't a ritual? And he's like, are you really sure? This feels ritualistic to me, guys. And they're like, no, look, it's just symbolism in our I forget how they really explain it, but it's Loken realizing that he is a man of faith, but it's faith in the Imperium, and this is him showing faith in Horus, basically, as part of his membership in the Mournival, Yeah,
and I mean, everyone's got their own belief system, whether there's a god involved or not. Everyone's got it,
right?
So,
so then he finds out people are meeting in secret and talking to anyone, regardless of rank, however you want, sharing ideologies in back rooms, and he's like, this feels like it could be used to carry some big secrets, guys. I get that you're telling me that this is just a way for us to meet as brothers, because the Space Marines are kids taken and turned into weapons, and all they have is a soldier's life, and behind closed doors in these lodges is for a way for them to not be soldiers in a weird way. So it's kind of human of them to want this. But all Loken can see is well, what if this did hold secrets? What could this be used to hide,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's all worried about it, but then he shows up to a meeting one day, and it's just everyone's just chilling and eating good food together and telling stories and jokes and hanging out. And he's like, all right, I guess this is chill.
Yeah. And he has a good time with, who is it, Torgadon? Is that the name of the other Space Marine that he likes in the Tarek Torgadon, yeah. He's like the comedy Space Marine, the one who's like, Loken, tell the story again. I love it how you tell it. Let's all have a big laugh and like run down the corridors slapping the pillars above us, you know?
Someone's got to be that guy. Yeah.
Such a nice guy. It is interesting that like even like there's Ezekiel Abaddon and Tarek Torgadon and Axeman, like the Monoval, and there's Iacton Cruz, who isn't super important in this story. He's just kind of like a really, really old Space Marine. People call him the half-herd. You know, they did a little bit of disrespect because he's just so old. But like the Lunar Wolves are written to be likable, right? Like even with like Abaddon being bloodthirsty and like basically being like, no, this is a waste. Like, what are we doing? Let's just kill them. They have Xenos companions in their like lifestyle and their society. Let's just kill them. That demands war alone. Right. But I don't know. People can be bellicose like that, and it's just really interesting that like they managed to write so many likable Space Marines who aren't even like the point of view characters. Like, you don't get a lot of in-depth stuff with Torgadon, but he's likable like immediately. Like, he's just so friendly.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that's nice. I mean, it's always nice when you write your characters as humans instead of like just killing machines. I do appreciate that.
Don't get attached to any of them.
Fair. I mean, with what happened with Jubal, I'm like, okay, so yeah, let's not get attached.
Yeah.
There's also a really good scene where Horus meets up with the children of the Emperor. And like, again, they've screwed this up real bad on murder. And he needs to rebuke them, but he also needs to like cultivate some like love from them. He needs them to respect him and like appreciate him. So he has his Mournival in the meeting, like play the part of the angry dad.
Right.
Like, you screwed up. What's wrong with you? Who dropped you on your head? Right. And then Horus can be the good guy being like, oh, come on. Yeah. Calm it down. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
It is very much the Mournival is it right to call them political maneuvering officers 100%. For Horus? Yeah. Like, and like a lot of this book is also like Loken coming to terms with that is actually part of his role as the Mournival. Like, he bought into that as just like a captain of like, he was the 10th company or whatever. He still is, but like he didn't see that from the outside. Like, it is not until he's told what's happening and that he's required to play a minor deception, something that he is kind of uncomfortable with as someone who likes truth, that he kind of struggles with that as part of his role.
Oh, for sure. Because, yeah, I think you said this about him when we talked last, was he's just a straight up and down dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's not trying to trick anyone. He's just trying to do his job. And so for him to be like, now you are a political maneuvering person, he's like, all right, I guess. Not really what I was trained for. Yeah. And I mean, one of the nice things too about the whole Space Marine kind of brotherhood is like, yeah, they were all genetically developed and bred pretty much the same way. So there's a specific time, I think later on in the book, where they talk about how they've all kind of got this, you know, bloodlust and this lust for fighting and war in them. So, like, if someone's going overboard with something, they're not like, "What's wrong with you?" Everyone gets it. Like, all the Space Marines are like, "Yeah, like we've been there.
That happens.
Like, we're gonna rein you back. Obviously, this isn't great, but we're not gonna judge you for it because we all have the same thing here too."
Right. They kind of they kind of get the aggression on some level, even if it's not their initial choice.
Yep.
Which. The book kind of makes it seem like, well, that the Space Marines are remarkably understanding of each other. That's really interesting. That's almost compassion from them, right?
Certainly.
Right, at least for each other. But you can see immediately how that can be a dangerous thing to just have in your warriors, where it's like, oh, all of these people are really, really angry, and the rest of them don't seem bothered by that. And when you have the Astartes who are elevated above normal people, they kind of become untouchables. And when they can get angry and just start I was gonna say something that happens in like the next book, but like,
Okay.
when you have angry, violent super soldiers who are grown up to be weapons, who are untouchable, they will do violent, angry, super soldiery things and get away with it. You know?
Right.
So
Which is not great.
it's not great.
Yeah. But it's
such
just kind of nice to have these characters who are, we talked about it, they're not quite human, right? People, you can have a conversation with a space marine, but you're never going to quite see them as a fellow 100% person, you know? So for them to have others that are in the same boat and be like, we're kind of freaks, but we're freaks together. Like, that's just kind of nice, you know?
Right. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. There's a lot of times where, like, Mercedes Ollerton is being sponsored by Loken, right? And she's, like, doing these interviews with him, and she's, like, meeting him in the practice chambers or whatever, where he's, like, practicing sword fighting or whatever, and is just looking upon his giant, muscular, almost, like, overly bulked to the point of being grotesque body, and it's just, like...
Yeah.
How am I supposed to, like, interview this man and, like, find anything common with him? Like, they're just so above and beyond us. And, like, all he wants to do is be, like, straight up and down, yes, no answers, kind of, like, we're weapons, we fight, that's what we do. Like, what do you need to know? Like, he's not super keen on there being a remembrancer, but he's not the least keen out of everyone. Like, I think Abaddon and... little Horus Axeman, like they just like straight up refuse. They don't go in for that. They think remembrances are a waste of time. And so yeah, you can see the divisions there between people in Space Marine. Yeah,
and on the same lines, when he's going to look for Euphrates, when he figured, like, she sends him photos that she's taken of Jubal after he's transformed, and he's like, crap. She knows that it's Jubal instead of a monster.
So, right, because like the official press release was like, oh, some beast got loose in the compound or whatever. But like she has these photos that show it in Space Marine armor, and she just gives it to him, right? Like, here, I know you'll do the right thing with these.
So, but before he finds her, he goes looking for her, but he takes his armor off and like puts on a cloak. And he goes to like where all the remembrancers are hanging out in this like tavern area they've set up on the ship, right? But and like he's just so clearly ginormous, even out of his armor.
Right.
He's trying to wear a hood. He's trying to be like inconspicuous. But yeah, he's clearly standing out. He has to like stoop to get in the door, and he's just so uncomfortable among regular humans. It was just a good moment where you're like, okay, it's like these. Yeah, they just don't belong. Like, they're not meant for normal society. They're meant for war, and that's all they are, you know? Anyway,
Good book. Really good book. I think we've covered just about everything. I think the only thing we haven't covered is Ignace Carcassy, this poet who, like, he's on, like, 6319, and he, like... makes a comment about how that this war is wrong, essentially. That, like, everything that they're doing is kind of awful.
No, all he says is what the Imperium is building will not last forever.
Right.
That's what he says.
That's what he says.
What pisses off the soldiers of the Imperium.
Yeah, and they kind of kick
heresy.
him.
They beat him almost to death. Like, he's unconscious, dragged away, almost dead. Like, still recovering from his injuries, like, weeks later.
Right.
But Loken goes to meet him, and he's like, you tell the truth. And he's like, yes. And he's like,
even when it's hard to hear.
Yeah. He's like, you know what? I'll keep you around. You just keep doing that.
Yeah.
I'll sponsor you. I'll watch out for you. You can stay. Just keep telling truth, even if people don't like hearing it.
Right. I really like Carcassy. He's... lovable is not the right word, but like enjoyable to read. He's just honest, and like he gets that like what the Imperium is building is not gonna last, and like that's an interesting insight for someone else who is essentially like with Mercedes and like Cinderman supposed to be the people who kind of see the value in what they're doing to like record and send back to Terra, right?
Yeah.
And like part of that's propaganda, and like he later goes and find out that a lot of his poems that he's sending back are being censored. But like it's essentially his job to also do this propaganda, but his propaganda is like, and the things that he says are not propaganda. Like, he's just too honest about it. And that is, for someone from our perspective, very easy to relate to in this position. Because, like, yeah, a lot of it's fucked.
Yeah. And again, this whole journey that Loken's on is, there's just a bunch of different people in his life and different things that happen that lead him down this kind of heretical line of thinking, right? Just kind of getting poked and prodded down this road. He's not looking for it. He's not seeking it out. It's just happening to him, you know? So, yeah, it's interesting.
And
then Cinderman finds that book where it talks about a planet that the Imperium conquered, where, like, the last holdout of this planet, there was crazy magic stuff going on. Like, locusts are appearing out of nowhere and, like, getting inside Space Marine suits and, like, eating them alive. And one of the things that's recorded in the book is, like, Space Marines turning into monsters and attacking and killing their brothers. And Cinnamon's like, read this book, Loken. And Loken's like, oh, okay, this is great. It's all about murder and death. And he gets to that part and he's like, what? So Cinnamon's got something going on here.
So I vaguely remember the fact that Cinnamon gives Loken a bunch of books to read. He's like, go check out these books. But I can't remember, like, I don't see it while I'm skimming over. But I think one of the books that he, like, gives to Loken to read is not Space Marines turning into demons and whatnot, but is basically set, like, it's like a book that's about Terra, and, like, one of the old kings that, like, the Emperor would have conquered about a couple hundred years ago on Earth. And, like, some psyker of reasonable skill or whatever that had used his power to, like, control a powerful land. But I don't think it was Space Marines. I would have to reread the book to go and find it. But it's definitely about, like, warp shenanigans.
100%. And possession in particular. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I was kind of hoping we'd have that conversation before the book ended, but it did not. So
no, unfortunately.
Book 2 it is.
Yeah. So at the end of the book, basically Horus finally admits to, like, calling his, like, renaming the Lunar Wolves to the Sons of Horus. Like, he takes that honor. That's been a minor plot point that when he was made War Master, the Emperor gave him the honor to, like, rename his legion in his image, essentially.
Right.
Because something this book doesn't touch on that they would expect you to know is that, like, the Emperor grew his 20 Primarch sons in vats on Earth, right? Before the Great Crusade.
Yeah. And
some warp shenanigans happened, and they got scattered throughout the galaxy. So part of the Great Crusade, which was supposed to be led by his Primarchs, his sons, who were to be his generals, but is instead about relocating them and reuniting them. And so that all the legions had to act autonomously without their dads.
Right.
And so the Lunar Wolves were called the Lunar Wolves before Horus was there. And Horus was still the first found son, so he's been around for the longest. It's kind of why he's an obvious pick to be the War Master. But that's why they're not called the Sons of Horus already, because he didn't name them to begin with. They had this title given to them.
Yep. Pretty cool stuff.
Pretty cool stuff. It's just one of those things that I think they would expect you to know the reasoning behind. But yeah. We're also shown that there's someone called First Chaplain Erebus, who is the guy that stole the anathema.
And started a massive war. What the crap, dude?
Yeah. So Erebus is a dick. He is, like, if you jump on r/Grimdark and look at some Warhammer memes, if there's anything about Erebus, the first, like, top comment is always fuck Erebus. He is a guy that sticks around for way too long and is way too up himself and way too evil to be permitted to live. But yeah,
bad times.
Yeah, it's nothing happens here. It's all like, hey, in the next book, where are we going? A small moon called Davin.
Right.
Yeah, made at the request of Chaplain Erebus. What could this be?
Bad times for everyone, probably.
Almost certainly.
That's my guess. Because it's Warhammer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, second book. It's still on hold. I thought it would come through last week. It didn't.
Oh, no?
I think I'm like the first person in line waiting for it. So
Okay. Not everyone
able
reads
to
as
get
fast as you.
apparently not.
Can you believe it?
I know. Taking weeks and weeks. Read one book.
How dare they?
How dare they? Yeah, hopefully next week we'll have some more of this trilogy to talk about. So
Yeah. Cool.
all right, but we are over.
We are over time.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna wrap this up. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out, listening to us ramble on about war stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and one last thing. It kind of makes me more interested in the Henry Cavill Warhammer project. That's all.
Oh,
All right.
okay. Yeah.
Hopefully it's good. All right. So yeah, just live at twitch.tv/Somicron on Tuesdays or Mondays if you're in the US, and Tuesdays if you're in Australia. It's also posted as a VOD on youtube.com/Somicron. You can support the podcast by going and buying merch at talkingpaladin.store and patreon.com/Somicron. So until next time, thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Until next time, as always, thanks, Aki. Salute to you too. And we'll catch you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.